Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something called gray witchcraft. And what's really cool about this deep dive is we're going to be looking at it through this public Q&A blog that's just called Ask a Gray Witch. So basically, it's like, if you have questions about witchcraft, you can submit them to the blog, and this practicing gray witch will answer them. Kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see this like firsthand perspective, not just somebody writing a textbook about it or talking about it theoretically. It's like somebody actually living this and answering questions from people.
And some of these questions that people are sending in are really, really interesting. Like there are questions about the difference between like humanist Wicca and Luciferian Wicca.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There are questions about like, would a witch ever seek vengeance? Like, what are the ethics of that? How do witches view that? And then there are even questions about, like, the practical application of how to cleanse a space using magic.
That's cool. This is really like a window into a world that I think a lot of people are curious about, but don't always have access to.
For sure, for sure. Now, before we get too far, we should mention that, obviously, this is just one gray witch's perspective. And in fact, they even say in the blog that this is all based on their personal experiences. Yeah. And they've decided to remain anonymous.
Right. It's important to remember that we're getting a single perspective here. And it might not represent like all gray witches or all the different ways that this type of witchcraft can be practiced.
Totally. So with that in mind, I guess the first thing we got to figure out is like, what even is a gray witch? What makes them different? Is there like a definition?
Well, from what I've seen in this blog, there's a really strong emphasis on balance. It's not so much about saying, like magic is good or evil, but rather about acknowledging that there are all these shades of gray and figuring out how to navigate them ethically.
So instead of black and white magic, it's about finding the right shade of gray for the situation.
Exactly. And you could see that in a lot of the answers they give.
Like that question about vengeance, I was really surprised that they didn't just say vengeance is bad. They actually talked about like scenarios where it might be justified, but always with this like this cautionary note.
Yeah, they even brought up the law of three, which basically says that the energy you put out into the world is going to come back to you threefold. So even if you're thinking about vengeance, you have to consider those consequences.
That's so interesting. So it's not like a black and white rule. It's more about thinking carefully about the implications of your actions.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this blog so compelling. It's not about dogma or rigid rules. It's about really considering the situation and the potential outcomes.
I like that. It's like they're weighing the magical scales with every decision.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. And you see that same nuanced thinking in a lot of their other answers.
Like the question about nudity and witchcraft. I never would have thought that would be such a complex topic.
Yeah, you'd think it would be like a simple yes or no answer.
Right. But they went so much deeper than that.
Well, yeah. They talked about the symbolism of clothing and how it relates to shedding inhibitions and connecting with primal energy.
And they even mentioned that some traditions practice skyclad, which is basically ritual nudity, while others don't.
It just goes to show that witchcraft isn't a monolithic thing. There's so much diversity within it.
Totally. It's making me rethink everything. I thought I knew about witchcraft. I always thought there were all these strict rules and traditions, but maybe it's more about personal interpretation and intention.
That seems to be a recurring theme in this blog.
Yeah, for sure. Another question that really stood out to me was the one about psychic mediumship. The Gray Witch actually shared some of their personal experiences with communicating with spirits and how that ties into their practice.
That's always a fascinating topic. It's the connection between witchcraft and the spirit world. It can be kind of spooky, but also really intriguing.
Yeah, I always imagine summoning ghosts in a graveyard like you see in the movies.
Well, it's not always like that. It can be about seeking guidance or honoring ancestors or even working with spirits for specific magical purposes.
But it's not necessarily about controlling spirits or anything like that.
Not according to this Gray Witch. They emphasize the importance of ethical considerations and respect for the spirits.
Which makes sense given their emphasis on the law of three. It seems like that principle really guides a lot of their practice.
Definitely.
So we've got a Gray Witch who emphasizes balance, personal ethics, and the power of intention, all woven through their answers. to these really diverse questions.
And we can't forget the connection to Stafford Tarot. It sounds like there might be
Yeah.
another layer to their practice that we
Yes.
haven't even explored yet.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely something we need to dive into. But first, let's take a closer look at some of these individual questions and answers. Buckle up, listeners. We're going deeper into the world of gray witchcraft.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these specific questions. One that really stood out to me was the one about necromancy. It's such a fascinating and often misunderstood topic.
Yeah, you hear necromancy and you automatically think of like dark magic and summoning evil spirits. But this gray witch presented a totally different perspective.
They were very clear that it's not about controlling spirits or forcing them to do your bidding. It's more about respectful communication and seeking guidance from those who have passed on.
Which again ties back to that idea of the law of three. Even when dealing with the spirit world,
Yeah.
there's this emphasis on ethical considerations and respect.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that magic,
Right.
in their practice at least,
Yeah.
is about working with energies responsibly, not manipulating them for selfish gain.
And they even made a distinction between necromancy and psychic mediumship, which I thought was really interesting.
That's a key difference. Necromancy is specifically about communicating with the spirits of the deceased, while psychic mediumship is a broader term. That encompasses communication with all sorts of spirits.
So necromancy is like a subset of mediumship.
You could say that. And what's really cool is that this gray witch claims to have experience with both. They even mentioned using scrying as a method for connecting with spirits.
Now, there's a term I bet some of our listeners might not be familiar with. What exactly is scrying?
It's a form of divination where you gaze into a reflective surface, like a crystal ball or a mirror, or even a bowl of water, and you try to receive visions or messages.
So it's not like seeing the future in a literal sense.
Not necessarily. Some people believe it allows you to tap into your subconscious mind, while others see it as a way to connect with other realms or entities. It really depends on your personal beliefs and how you interpret the experience.
And it seems like this gray witch uses scrying for both personal insight and spirit communication.
Which shows how versatile a tool it can be.
Definitely. Speaking of personal approaches, I was really fascinated by their answer to the question about synchronicity. You know those moments where it feels like the universe is sending you a message through all these weird coincidences?
Oh, yes. Synchronicity. It's something that I think a lot of people experience,
Oh.
whether they're into witchcraft or not.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of being connected to something bigger than yourself. Have you ever noticed synchronicity in your own life?
Oh, all the time. Especially when I'm working on a new project or really focused on a specific goal. It's like these little signs start popping up everywhere.
Exactly. And what this gray witch suggests is that these synchronicities can actually be amplified or even orchestrated through magical practice.
Really?
Yeah, it's like you're tuning into a frequency that allows you to perceive these meaningful coincidences more clearly.
That's wild. It makes me think about intention again. Like if you set a clear intention and focus your energy, maybe you can actually attract more of these synchronicities.
It's an interesting idea. Maybe those moments of coincidences aren't really coincidences at all, but rather reflections of our own inner state and the energy we're putting out into the world.
Whoa. That's pretty deep. So we've talked about necromancy and scrying and synchronicity, all these really fascinating concepts. But I want to circle back to something a bit more practical. The question about banishing. I think a lot of people are curious about that.
Yeah, banishing rituals are pretty common in witchcraft. It's basically about getting rid of negative energies.
Yeah.
Or influences, whether it's from a person or a place, or even yourself.
And this gray witch actually had a really interesting take on it.
Oh yeah, what was it?
They talked about banishing negative self-talk and limiting beliefs. They even called it a form of magical self-care.
That's such a cool way to think about it. It's not just about getting rid of external negativity, but also the negativity we carry within ourselves.
Exactly. It's like cleansing your inner space as well as your outer environment.
Which again ties back to that idea of balance.
This gray witch is full of surprises.
They really make you think about magic in a new way.
Okay, so we've covered necromancy, scrying, synchronicity, banishing.
Right.
All these really cool topics. But there's one more question that I think deserves some attention. The one about humanist Wicca and Luciferian Wicca.
Oh, yeah. Those are some pretty loaded terms.
Can you give us a little background on that?
Sure. Basically, the Grey Witch described humanist Wicca as a path that focuses on human experience and doesn't require belief in deities. It's more about connecting with nature and celebrating the cycles of life.
So it's kind of like a secular form of Wicca?
You could say that.
And then they contrasted that with Luciferian Wicca, which they described as a path that honors Lucifer, not as a devil figure, but as a symbol of knowledge, individuality, and rebellion against dogma.
That's a really different interpretation
Yeah.
than what most people think of
Right.
when they hear the name Lucifer.
Right. It seems like this Grey Witch is really challenging traditional interpretations and encouraging people to think for themselves.
Which is something I really admire about them. They're not afraid to question the status quo.
It's like they're saying there's no one right way to practice witchcraft. It's all about finding what resonates with you and creating your own unique path.
Exactly. And that's what makes the world of witchcraft so fascinating. There's so much diversity and variety.
So we've talked about all these different aspects of Grey Witchcraft, but we can't forget about the connection to Stafford Tarot.
Right. That's something we need to explore further.
It seems like tarot might play a key role in this Grey Witch's practice. So let's dive into that in our final segment. Stay tuned, listeners. All right, so we've covered some pretty intense topics, necromancy, Luciferian Wicca, but I want to circle back to something a little more practical. The question about magical cleansing. This Grey Witch seems to get asked about this a lot.
Yeah, it makes sense. Cleansing is like a foundational practice in a lot of magical traditions.
And they really got into the details, too, talking about all these different tools and techniques, like using sound and smoke and visualization.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned using bells and chanting and burning herbs like sage or palo santo.
It's almost like a sensory experience.
Totally. Engaging all the senses to clear out negativity.
And they even said that you don't need any fancy tools to do it. You can just use your imagination.
Oh, right. They suggested visualizing bright light, filling the space and pushing away any darkness.
It's like a mental and emotional cleanse.
Exactly. And it all comes back to intention.
Intention. That seems to be the key takeaway from this whole deep dive.
It's not just about going through the motions. It's about the energy and focus you bring to the practice.
It's like intention is the fuel that powers the magic.
I love that analogy. And this Grey Witch is clearly very intentional in everything they do.
Yeah, you can see it in all their answers, whether they're talking about cleansing a space or working with spirits or even just navigating everyday life.
It's a reminder that we all have the power to shape our reality to some extent.
To manifest our desires.
Exactly.
Okay, so we talked about intention, we've talked about cleansing, but there's one last thing I want to touch on before we wrap up. The connection to Stafford Tarot.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The tarot website that's linked on the blog.
It definitely adds another layer of intrigue to this whole Grey Witch persona.
Yeah, it suggests that tarot plays a significant role in their practice.
And according to the website, Stafford Tarot is run by an intuitive pagan with years of experience in metaphysical workings.
It's like they're weaving together all these different esoteric practices into their own unique blend.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think what's most striking about this Grey Witch is their emphasis on balance and personal ethics. It's not about using magic for selfish gain. It's about aligning with a deeper sense of purpose and using your power responsibly.
And they're not afraid to challenge conventions.
Right. They encourage us to question our assumptions and think for ourselves.
It's really refreshing. They're showing us that witchcraft isn't about dogma or rigid rules. It's a path of self-discovery and personal growth.
And it can be accessible to anyone, even if you don't consider yourself a witch.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that inner power that we all possess and using it to create a more fulfilling life.
Well said.
So if you're intrigued by what we've discussed today, I highly encourage you to check out the Ask Grey Witch blog, maybe even submit a question of your own.
Yeah, you never know what insights you might gain.
And that's what it's all about, right? Expanding our knowledge, challenging our perspectives, and embracing the mysteries of the universe.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey into the world of Grey Witchcraft. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that spark of curiosity alive